My name is Claire Morrison. I am 33 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, and I want to tell you about the Tuesday afternoon in September, when I came home 4 hours early from a 12-hour shift and found 2 cars in my driveway where there should have been 1. I want to tell you what I did in the hour after that. Because what a person does in the hour after the worst discovery of their life tells you more about who they actually are than almost anything else. And what I did was sit in my car at the end of my own driveway and make 3 phone calls. The first call was to a divorce attorney whose number I had saved in my phone 8 months earlier after a colleague told me, "You hope you never need this number, but save it anyway," and I had saved it and hoped, and now I needed it. The second call was to my bank, where I spoke to someone about separating joint accounts and what documentation I would need and what the timeline looked like. And I want to tell you that I took notes during that call in the Notes app on my phone, sitting in my car in my own driveway. The third call was to my mother, who lives 40 minutes away in Cedar Park, and who answered on the second ring. And I told her what I had found, and she said, "I am getting in the car right now," and I said, "Not yet. Give me 2 weeks." And she said, "2 weeks for what?" And I said, "I will explain later." Before I tell you what happened in those 2 weeks, I want to tell you how I got to that driveway. Because the driveway was not the beginning of this story. It was the end of a very long middle, and understanding the middle is the only way the ending makes any sense. I met Daniel at a hospital fundraiser 6 years before that Tuesday afternoon, and he was easy to be with in the specific way that makes you stop asking questions you should be asking. Easy in a way I now understand was not ease at all, but the smoothness of someone who has always known how to make people comfortable enough not to look too closely. We married after 2 years of dating and bought a house in East Austin that was at the outer edge of what we could afford. And I want to be honest about the financial arrangement of our marriage, which is that Daniel worked from home as a freelance consultant and my income as a nurse was the stable foundation that everything else was built on. I did not resent that arrangement. I want to be clear about that. I had chosen this man in this house, and I understood that building something together sometimes means one person carries more of the weight for a season. And I told myself that was what we were in, and that the season would eventually balance itself out. What I did not know was that Daniel had a very different understanding of what my long shifts and my predictable absences were for. And that understanding had apparently included the woman who moved in next door 8 months before that Tuesday afternoon. Her name was Stacy, and she had moved in after a divorce of her own. And she had been friendly from the beginning, borrowing things, waving from the driveway, stopping to talk. And I had been glad to have her there because the hours I worked meant I was often not home. I want to tell you about the signs I missed, not because I think I should have caught them, but because naming them honestly is more useful than pretending they were invisible. And the signs were not invisible. They were simply things I had decided had innocent explanations before I actually examined whether the explanations were true. Daniel had started taking longer to answer his phone when I called from work. And when I asked about it, he said he had been in the middle of calls, which was plausible because he worked from home. And I accepted that explanation because it fit the life I understood us to be living. He had started showering in the afternoons on days when he had not done anything that I could see that would require a shower. And I noticed it and said nothing because noticing something and knowing what it means are 2 different things, and I was not ready to know. Stacy had started coming over less frequently in the 2 months before that Tuesday, which I had registered as her simply settling into her new life, and I had felt something slightly like relief about it. And I now understand what that feeling had actually been. I had been working a double shift that Tuesday, but at 2 in the afternoon a scheduling change meant my second half was covered by someone else, and I drove home feeling the particular lightness of unexpected free time, thinking about what I was going to do with 4 hours. I turned onto my street and I saw both cars from the end of the block, Daniel's truck and Stacy's car, and I want to tell you exactly what I felt. I did not feel shocked. I felt the particular coldness of a thing you have been refusing to know finally becoming impossible to refuse. I pulled into the driveway behind both cars and I turned off my engine and I sat there, and I did not go inside. Not because I was afraid of what I would find, but because I already knew and I understood that going inside in that moment would cost me the next 2 weeks. I made my 3 phone calls and then I drove to a coffee shop 2 miles away and I sat there for 2 hours and I thought about what I was going to do, not what I was going to feel. I had time to feel later. And by the time I drove back home at the normal time, I had a plan that was complete in every detail I could control. Daniel was in the kitchen when I came in, relaxed in the way of someone who believes they have gotten away with something, And he asked about my shift, and I said it had been long, and we had dinner and watched television and went to bed. And I lay in the dark beside him and thought about the attorney and the bank account and my mother waiting in Cedar Park. I want to tell you about the particular quality of those 2 weeks because people imagine it as exhausting performance of normalcy. And it was not exactly that. It was more like the calm that comes when a decision has been made and the only thing left is the execution of it. And there is a strange peace in that. I cooked dinner every night during those 2 weeks, the same dinners I had always cooked, and I went to work and came home and answered Daniel's questions about my day. And I watched him be comfortable in the way that people are comfortable when they believe they are safe. And that comfort was clarifying rather than painful. I also want to tell you something about Stacy, because I think the more important character in this story is the man who was in my kitchen every evening asking about my shift while spending my afternoons in a way I had not consented to and had not been told about. The attorney told me during our second meeting that the case was straightforward, meaning the financial records were clear. My income had been the primary support of the household. The property had been purchased largely with savings I had accumulated before the marriage. And the documentation I had been keeping made everything impossible to argue with. I had been keeping records, not because I suspected anything, but because I have always kept records. It is a habit from nursing, from years of documentation and the understanding that what is written down is real, in a way that what is only remembered is not. And that habit turned out to be exactly what I needed. I met with the attorney twice, moved money from our joint savings into a separate account in my name only, called the real estate attorney about the house, spoke to my manager about my schedule going forward, and told my mother what I was doing, and she said, "I raised you right," and I said, "I know." The morning I placed the envelope on the kitchen table, I had been awake since 4, and I made coffee and sat at the table in the quiet of the house and thought about the 6 years I had spent in it, and the person I had been when I moved into it, and the person I was now. And the distance between those two people was significant. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee when I placed the envelope in front of him, and he looked at it and looked at me, and I said, "Those are divorce papers. I need you to be out of the house by Friday." His face did the thing that phases do when a person has been completely blindsided, and he said, "Claire, I can explain." And I said, "I am not interested in the explanation. I have been to see an attorney, and I have separated our accounts, and I need you to be out by Friday." He said, "How long have you known?" And I said, "Long enough to be ready." And I said, "I want you to understand something clearly. I am not angry at you. I am simply done. And those are two different things, because anger passes, but done is a decision." Stacy's husband, who I had not known existed until the attorney's process turned up some information I had not been looking for, found out about what had been happening approximately 3 weeks after Daniel moved out. And I will say only that the neighborhood changed significantly in the months that followed. I kept the house because the mortgage had been paid primarily by my income and the attorney was thorough. And the first morning I woke up in that house alone and understood that it was fully mine did not feel like victory or relief. It felt like the beginning of something I had not yet given a name to. What I know now is that the 3 phone calls I made in that driveway were the most important calls of my adult life. Not because of what they set in motion practically, but because of what making them in that moment said about who I was. Someone who, even in the worst moment of her life, knew what the next right thing was and did it. What I have given it a name to now, 3 years later, is simply my life, the one I am building on my own terms, where the shifts I work go toward something that belongs to me and no one else. And the driveway has exactly 1 car in it, and I know exactly where it has been. Subscribe to She Said Enough because there are more stories like this one. And if this story stayed with you, leave me a comment and tell me about the moment you knew, because I read every single one and I want to know.